It doesn't matter what you want. Hey,
That's what
good
you
morning.
say every time.
Good morning, mediums. Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. It's season 3. It's episode 5. Today we're here with epic YA fantasy author Stephen Allan. He started writing in 2014. His books include the Kastori Chronicles and the War of the Magi Chronicles. Like I said, he's been writing since 2014 under a pen name, and he started up in 16 writing under his real name. So today he's going to join us. We're going to talk about his writing journey and learn what YA epic fantasy means. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, too.
For sure.
Stephen,
Awesome.
welcome to the show, buddy.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. I'm really pumped to do this. So looking forward to the next, hour and a half. So
it's, we were just talking in the pre-show how discombobulated we were this morning. And Scott said, yeah, that's going to lead to a really good show. And I have a good feeling about it. Because the internet is broken, because we can't have our overlays. And I'm really upset about that now.
That does upset me.
You just gave me my overlay and it doesn't work. What's going on, man?
It's a good overlay is kind of like a tattoo. So if you had like a tattoo that was really awesome and then sometimes it didn't work, how could that happen?
It's not all I know is it's not my fault. I'm just saying that right now. It's not my fault.
I think it's part of some grand conspiracy because you guys, for whatever reason, think I don't deserve an overlay. Well, screw you.
We're all. Everybody put away your overlays. Nobody can see them.
Yeah.
Don't tell Ralph.
Don't tell Ralph.
Man, we'll just blame it on net neutrality going bye-bye.
Oh, that's it. That's what it is.
Yeah, hashtag, let's not talk about that.
Political conversation.
It's so the Super Bowl was yesterday. Maybe it's because the Patriots lost. Didn't the Patriots lose, right? So maybe it's because they lost, which is why they're not.
The Eagles have never won a Super Bowl.
Did you see they were burning down things in their town?
I was going to say, the city of Philadelphia cannot possibly be still standing at this point.
No. Burn it down.
I saw at least one car on fire, which also happens when we host a show. We light cars on fire.
Usually. Yeah.
Not all the time, but sometimes people get carried away.
I've seen your videos of your training weeks, Josh, and things go boom.
Yeah, that's my bad.
A little bit of chaos.
Might have brought some extra C3 home. Here you go, honey.
There you go.
Fun with the kids.
Yeah, that's
true. We can do with this.
Hey, you could pound it with a hammer. I'm sure it'll be all right. You give to kids.
Yeah, safe.
It's just like plasticine, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, I mean it's completely safe and harmless.
What's the worst that could happen, right?
It's true.
Well, let's get cracking. These are some awesome. I'm loving the book covers here, and I want to get to them, but that's usually later in the show. So
yeah, so I did mention that when we were doing our pre-show. So let's talk about your book, Stephen. YA epic fantasy. Tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about your books.
So I've always been a writer. In college, I was a journalism major. When I graduated college, I didn't go straight into writing. I actually did something unusual. I became a professional poker player. But even then, I was blogging probably 3-4 times. I always said I was going to write a book about my time living in Las Vegas. But at the time, frankly, I just had no concept of self-publishing. Even though it kind of started around that time, I had no concept of making money writing. So my idea of writing was, I'll do this on the side on evenings when I'm free. I'll publish, 2 or 3 books in my lifetime, and I'll call it a day. Until one day, this was probably spring of 2013, I was on Reddit reading their Ask Me Anythings, and this guy posted and said, I make $2,000 a month writing short stories, ask me anything. So of course I'm like, $2,000 a month from someone who would have been happy selling 50 books in his lifetime. Let me check this out. So I'm reading it. Yeah, and I'm reading it, and he's talking about how I self-publish on Amazon. I write books that are about 30 to 40 pages. Individually, they don't make a ton of money, but the collective whole, it's kind of like a rising tide lifts all ships type of thing. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a look at this. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, oh, there's real potential here. So I got really serious about writing my book about my time in Las Vegas. And of course, it's my first book. So I have all these delusions of it becoming a New York Times bestseller, USA Today. And of course, it's literally, it's the story of my time in Vegas, but it was fictionalized. So I don't know what you'd call that, memoir, not really memoir. Anyways, so
I like to call it it's a docu-novel.
Docu-novel. So before we go further, can we see your poker face? Yeah, like a poker face. Of course, you have right there. There, let's see it.
I need sunglasses, and I need a hood, and I need sorry to all the.
We should do
people.
a poker episode.
Oh my God!
We're just all playing poker.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry.
Guys, I don't even wear trousers.
Yeah.
On a normal show, I'll be doing.
And everybody's got 4 aces, so we don't know how to figure that out.
It would be like The Simpsons, where he's got 5.
Oh my God, to get into the wild card games and stuff. But yeah, so I published that book, and on the first day, I remember it went live in the morning, and I refused to check my sales until that night because I was convinced naively that I was going to wake up or going to come back and there'd be hundreds of sales. You know, all my friends would buy it. Amazon would launch it, and it would just become like a thing. And then at the end of the day, I had 8 sales, and I was like, okay. This is a gut check. This is an ego check. And by the end of the month, it had sold something like 25 copies, which, you know, for being a docu-novel, which is not exactly something you hear people like Chris Fox and others talk about being riding the market.
Right.
I feel like, it was fine. But I got, after that AMA, I really wanted to explore more of actually making an income at this. So at this time, I had moved back from Las Vegas. I was back in Charlotte, North Carolina, with the idea that I was going to go to grad school. And so, of course, I'm splitting my time writing and studying for the whatever test it was. I don't remember. One of those 3-letter tests, doing interviews, that sort of thing. And so I just decided I'm just going to write in a bunch of different genres. So pretty much every genre you can think of, I would just put a 30 to 40 page short story up under a pen name, see how it did, see how it stuck. Some of them started to stick. And so I was kind of faced with the decision in April where I had an offer to go to grad school at Wake Forest, or I could keep writing. And at the time, I was making, it was like something in the $500 to $600 realm. So it's clearly not enough to live off of, but it was also the kind of thing where I could see the trend. It was curving upward. I had money put in the bank, so I knew that it might suck for a couple of months, but I could survive if this curve continued upward.
So that's interesting. I want to ask you something real quick before we move on. You started out doing short stories, and that's all you're publishing, and that's what you were making your $400 to $500 a month on, was just short stories that you're putting up there. And that may seem like a little bit, not to
that's really
like a little amount, but that's a really good amount to make, just making without doing any marketing or just starting out and just putting short stories up. That's really good.
I will say there was a sequel I wrote to the Vegas book, but I kind of knew that it wasn't going to do anything. It was kind of this weird dichotomy where on the one hand, I knew rationally that if that first book isn't going to sell like hotcakes, the second one's not. But the ego, for lack of a better word, made me want to write that second story. But the stuff that was making money, it was pretty much all, writing a short story a week. Some weeks if I was really on fire, writing 2 short stories a week. But yeah, I mean, I've kind of always been a little bit insane in the regard that I'm willing to jump ship onto something, even if it's not fully formed or developed, which is why for me, the $500 or $600 wasn't, oh, this is nice side income. It was like, can I make this work being full-time, or $500 or $600 a month for the first couple of months here?
So what you say you were always a writer, and when you were playing poker and doing all that stuff, you blogged, but when you get into writing fiction, we read a lot, we watch a lot of TV and a lot of movies and things. What was it about writing fiction that you got? What was it that really originally got you excited about getting into and writing fiction, short stories or whatever?
Right. Well, it's funny because as a kid, I played a lot of RPG video games, and I loved stories with magic. So like Final Fantasy, especially.
Yeah.
We could literally turn this podcast into 10 hours talking about Final Fantasy.
Love Final Fantasy.
Oh yeah. And so for basically about 3rd grade to 8th grade, I was a huge, I shouldn't say a huge, but, you know, for a 4th grader, I was writing fiction, like about, you know, 200, 300 words a day, and wrote crazy stories like me going to Mars or whatever. Well, then in 8th grade, I took a class in creative writing. And at the time, I was pretty much a slacker student, you know, usual middle school blues, that kind of thing. And at the end of the semester, I had a B-, and I could have had a B+ if I had submitted a particular assignment on time. Well, of course I didn't, because middle school. And I saw that teacher probably after winter break, and she came up to me and she was like, you know, for someone like you with all the potential, I would have thought you would have been better in my class, but I guess not. I'm like, man.
Thanks for
talk about damning with faint praise there.
I know.
Wow.
And I heard that, and I was like, all right, well, I'm already an 8th grader with absolutely no self-confidence, so you just knocked me down 5 pegs. And I, you know, I wish I'd gone back into your yearbook so I could like remember her name, but all I remember was that one comment and that the snide smirk she gave it with. Like,
it's like the rarely used talent shaming, you know.
I know
it's for talent,
right? It's like, man, if you just tried, but yeah. But then to get back to why I got back into it, I think it was just sort of the realization that when something kind of settles your soul in a way that nothing else can, the more fiction I read, the more I thought about wanting to write it, wanting to go back to those days of being, you know, 10 years old and pretending I'm in a Final Fantasy video game and writing those stories. You know, it's kind of a question that is a little bit tricky to answer definitively, but I think it's one of those things where when you know, you know. Yeah. And when the iron strikes and it's, you know, scalding hot, keep striking it.
Oh, yeah. And so
when you're an interesting era, wasn't it, for computer games? Because I think as I go around 13, early part of that decade, anyway, this decade, you started having computer games that were so popular that they were having spin-off books, movies, as opposed to the other way around, where you'd have movies and books which had spin-off computer games. Like they became the primary,
yeah. It's so interesting because I am not, well, I am now, but back then I really wasn't a huge reader. I didn't get around to reading Lord of the Rings until probably like 3 years ago. But that essence of strong characters, strong plot, compelling story struck with me, even though it didn't come through the medium that most authors get it through.
Yeah.
And I've never read Lord of the Rings.
I read it in high school. Late in high school, and it was a hard read. My oldest son, read it in like I think he was 7 or 8 when he read it, and I was like, "Oh my God, he must be the smartest child in the world."
It is dense. I've read it relatively recently.
Slow book,
about
actually.
10 years ago or so, and I just remember thinking, as much as it's a seminal piece, it's an important piece. It doesn't feel like it's kept up to date, perhaps as much as some of the other books
It's written in a different era, written in a different era, and you know, I think, you know, back then people wanted books to take as long as possible. You know, you had a lot more free time on your hands. You know, that's why, like Dickens, you read some of those things and stuff, and
there's no other media competing for your attention, right, is there? But, so, I mean, again, it shows how much the rules have evolved. I suppose. So, like, you know, the info dump, like Lord of the Rings, is like 90% info dump. It's like, yeah, you know, and 5% awful poems, and then 5% story. Yeah.
So getting in through those and reading Lord of the Rings or whatnot. So when you're writing your short stories, what genres were you writing in?
Pretty much everything: sci-fi, horror, fantasy, even dabbled a little bit in romance. I really, at the time, I think if I knew I was going to get pulled to fantasy, that's what I wanted to do. But, you know, maybe writing romance would have helped me written more compelling, you know, male-female dynamics in my novels. Sure. Or maybe writing sci-fi was the kind of thing where sci-fi is interesting to me because in fantasy, you can make up your own universe. You know, in my universe, there's dragons, there's magic, and as long as it's consistent, it's fine. Sci-fi, even though it's you know, it's science fiction, it has to be grounded to a certain extent, more so than fantasy. And I think that was really good for helping me in my writing.
Rick what is our live chat? He says that horror romance is an underserved genre.
There you go. That's the next right to market book. Horror romance.
I think that a lot of people.
Well, active werewolf romance.
Yes.
I think there might be someone here with an interest in that.
It's like some people are late to the show because they're watching the new Solo trailer. So yeah. Now we're getting.
It looks okay. It looks okay. The new Solo movie looks better than The Last Jedi, anyway. So, but that's a whole completely different conversation.
So do we want to? I'd love to talk about fantasy and kind of what maybe some of your first fantasy stuff that you've written was, or kind of tell us about some of that.
So the first series I ever wrote, the Kastori Chronicles, it started in the fall of 2015, and I had kind of reached a point where I'd been writing under pen names, and I got kind of sick of telling people, "Oh, I'm an author," and they say, "Oh, what are your stories?" And I'd say, well, I kind of keep my pen names private. So it's like, well, okay, sure, you're an author. The thing that I really liked about the Kastori Chronicles was, speaking of Star Wars, I am a huge Star Wars fan. We'll save the Last Jedi discussion for later, if never. But essentially, like we were talking about Lord of the Rings, Star Wars is my de facto hugest series. I'm just speaking gibberish right now, but I love the Star Wars series. And so I really modeled a lot of what's in Star Wars in the Kastori Chronicles. So for example, the role of family dynamics plays a huge role. And I think in any series, in my opinion, the more, this is a weird way to put it, but family oriented in the sense that family plays a crucial role, the more people can relate to it. Sibling dynamics play a huge role in the series. The series starts with 3 people on a ship escaping the clutches of the enemy. Not quite like Star Wars, because the enemy is not actively chasing them, but very similar to that. You know, the final battle in the Kastori Chronicles involves the villain against a family member. And I just think fantasy gives the creative freedom to do whatever I want and set my own rules. And I really enjoy that aspect of it. You know, I've tried to write, for example, urban fantasy, grounded in the real world, and I often find that I don't enjoy that as much as being able to create my own planets, my own cities, my own magical systems, and that kind of thing. And I love the freedom that fantasy gives.
Yep. So what was your Kastori Chronicles and also the War of the Magi, which we'll get into here in a little while. Yeah. You wrote those under your real name, not under a pen name. Was that kind of a conscious decision by you to this is what I want to do now, so I want to use my real name, or what was the thought process there?
Definitely. I think it was 2 parts. One was kind of the ego part where, you know, it's like, oh, hey, look, I wrote this book. And the second part, I think psychologically, I found I cared more if I was attaching my name to it. This is not a pen name, but if I just had a name of like PJ James or something, and I wrote a sci-fi short and it sucked, I could just jettison it mentally, because I could just say, oh, I don't know who PJ James is.
Right.
But,
what a loser.
Yeah, scrub.
That's the problem with writing today, that guy.
Yeah. But I found that if I wrote under my real name, I had to keep in mind that I wanted it to represent the best of my skill and the best of my talent. So instead of writing one draft, doing a quick proofread and sending it out, now I would go through a couple of drafts. I'd have beta readers. I'd have an editor. I'd do that kind of thing. It would take it a lot more seriously.
It's a scary thing.
One of the things I'm interested in is, so obviously you cut your teeth on short stories, which in many ways is a kind of traditional route, if you follow. So you often had sort of authors who would do short stories for magazines, etc., and then sort of branch out to novels. Is that, I mean, I suppose what I'm asking is the skills you picked up in short story writing transferable to the novel writing that you did?
My immediate answer is yes, and I think the most But I think the biggest difference for me is that when I was writing short stories, I was writing once or twice a week. So the idea generation has to be off the charts, which I think is good because it's like a muscle, right? You use it more than once, use it regularly, it's going to get better and stronger. Now, I tend to write kind of longer fantasy. More of the Magi is 130,000 words. The Kastori Chronicles are on the 90 to 100,000 word range. So writing those were that. But I think the short story skills that you pick up I think the pacing is something that I got really good at. Because it's very easy in a 130,000 word story to drag very badly, such as Wheel of Time. But when you write short stories, you have 8,000 words to tell a story that is worth reading, that is compelling and has enough action or psychological conflict to keep going. So I think pacing was a strong skill I picked up.
Yeah, you got it to sharpen the blade doing that. The short stories. I like writing long fiction better, but yeah, the short stuff makes you work.
It does. I have noticed that because I did not start out as a short story writer. I started out as a novel writer and did not understand really pacing until I started doing short stories. And I started doing short stories and realized there is something to getting your ideas across with the least amount of words, so you don't have like a Lord of the Rings, like just poetic draft that's 800,000 words of nonsense, right?
Right. And I think another thing that I've thought about is in short stories, because of the constraint, you have to leave a little bit up to the reader to fill in the gaps at certain times. I'm one of those writers who I'll get feedback sometimes with, well, I wish I knew this. And my response to that is sometimes be patient. Because I don't like to have, the synopsis in the first 10 pages. I try and start all my books with action because I believe, as many much smarter and more successful people have said, you need a strong opening hook. But, things like family ties, who's who, who's really good and who's really evil, I think those are best served being paid off in the long run. And I think by writing short stories, you get better at being able to hold that and letting the reader pick up on it, or holding it to the very end for that payoff.
Got a question.
Sorry.
Got a question I'd like to get to before we lose it out of the live chat. Vicky wants to talk about copyright, or since you went from a pen name, so I'll add part. So you had a bunch of pen names, and then how'd you make that transfer over, and then. Is there anything you should worry about with copywriting between a pen name and your real name? This is a question I've had also in the past.
Yeah. Real answer, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say. Right. My experience answer is I've had no problems with it. And the reason being is that I still control them on Amazon. I'm exclusive. I'm KDP. Right. I am exclusive. I own the books. I have the files. I haven't sold them to anyone. I haven't transferred the rights to anyone. Again, a lawyer's your best advice, but from my own personal experience, I've never run into Amazon or anyone else or whatever giving me problems with that.
I had thought that in one of our discussion groups, maybe been a while back, that your copyright's your copyright. It doesn't really matter whether it's your name or your pen name. It still belongs to you.
Yeah,
exactly.
But you might talk to a lawyer if you're worried about it. But like I said, the big thing is if you control everything, and if Amazon sends you a copyright notice, you can say, I am the copyright holder, and then they generally leave you alone.
Right. And I think, too, this is just me saying, I've never had a book take off to the point where I really gave serious thought to getting legal input for it. I think that's one of those things where your gut will tell you if you need a lawyer for copyright and that kind of thing.
Copywriting, as I understand, is once you create something, it's copyrighted. The hard part is proving it in a court of law. So if you have to defend your copyright, unless you registered it or however you send it off to the Copyright Office, then you basically have no standing. It's hard to prove in court.
Right.
Unless you did that. But technically, it's copyrighted as soon as you publish it or create it in any type of format, as I understand.
Yeah,
I do wonder on that now whether you could have producible evidence in terms of. So I look at, say, the Word document I do. It does a series of auto saves. I mean, we're probably deviating from any kind of discussion we want to go on. So
no, we're good. You're good.
But now, like when you have Word documents which can register how often you save it, and then I know that my Word document, for example, is registered to a Word account. So in theory, I suppose, and when my editor, goes and does edits, I see which bits she's had influence on. I don't know, something to think, and it'll be one of those things that will be interesting to be tested in court at some point. Hopefully not by me.
Yeah, hopefully not by me.
Nobody we know.
Exactly.
But no one we know or like. but I think that there's I think basically that it should be that the documents themselves can provide that audit trail if you were able to actually then pull that audit trail out of the document. But anyway, that's probably by the by on this discussion, but an interesting one. Right. I had a thought on your short stories. Obviously, cut your teeth on short stories. Certainly know when I've written short stories before, and I thought, actually, I really like that scene. And then the scene has, in some form, found its way into a novel. Have you ever done that, sort of test something in a short story and then expanded on it in one of your novels?
Actually, it's funny you say that. So one of the incentives I give readers to sign up for my mailing list is I send out one free short story a month that's exclusive to them. It's not on Amazon. It will be eventually, but I'll get to why it will be. And that is, so I send out the short story. It's usually in the range of 6,000 to 10,000 words. And a week later, I'll send a survey to them and I'll say, how did you like this story? Would you buy it on Amazon? And a couple of other questions like open-ended feedback and that kind of thing. And the idea that I'm doing with this is that once I finish the War of the Magi series, I'm going to look at those feedback surveys, see which book garnered the most interest, and then turn that into a series. And then the other books, which may not have had such great feedback or had good feedback, but just weren't as good as that top-rated one, are going to get turned into an anthology, at which point I would put that up on Amazon.
I really like that. That's both a... that fits in with sort of a lot of what Chris Fox is about, which is writing to market. You're polling your market. You're saying, right, fellas, which one do you want me to take forward? And then you are writing to that market. But crucially, you've tested that market. So, and especially if you're trying something a little bit new or a little bit experimental, I like that idea. I like that idea a lot.
Yeah, and it's a fail-safe testing ground for maybe wacky or random ideas I have. So, for example, I had one idea of remember that horrible movie, The Waterworld, where the entire world is flooded? And who's the main star? I don't remember. But
Kevin Costner.
Kevin Costner, yes.
Robin Hood.
Oh, man. I had the idea of writing a fantasy story based on that, but kind of like Game of Thrones-esque with a lot of different kingdoms, except instead of, the Game of Thrones world.
Take Kevin Costner out of it and put... No, I'm kidding.
Exactly, right. But it would all take place on water. I'll be honest with you. I hated the idea I was writing it, but it seemed like such a unique angle that I hadn't seen a lot before outside of that movie that I thought, well, what's the harm in trying it? So I wrote it. It was about 6,000 to 8,000 words. I haven't checked the feedback yet because I'm waiting until I have a chance to compare the feedback side by side. But it's the kind of thing where I can test that. It takes me a day to write. I know my readers love receiving stories in general because of the emails I get back. And
I think that we should. I know. I would love to hear more about your feedback process and some of those things. Now, I'm not sure if Josh has something for us in the middle of things. You want to do that now, or do you want to move on before we change course? Because I'm really the feedback from your authors, Alan, is. That's something we all want, and it's hard to really get that engagement. So I would like to talk some more about that.
Yeah, we'll stop really quick for the show sponsor this week, and then move on through the conversation. I do want to kind of talk about this epic YA genre that since you've mentioned kind of going into these different directions, I want to include that in the conversation here. But the sponsor this week is Scott's book, Outlaws. It's Darklanding number 3. When's the number 4 coming out, Scott?
It's a couple of days. I don't know exactly.
It's very soon. His Darklanding series with Craig.
They're always coming out a couple of days.
It's every 18 days. It's pretty neat, and the story is really good. The characters are really fun. The Outlaws. I lost where I was. There we go. The description for Outlaws is as follows: how does a train robber take down an automated supersonic bullet train? A frontier world, one sheriff, and all the action one spaceport can't hold. Unrefined ore is moved by a state-of-the-art monorail from the mines to the spaceport. It's never gone off the tracks until now. What kind of crew is crazy enough to mess with SagCon's investments? Who has the training and the tech to pull off this kind of heist? Unprocessed ore is difficult to remove from the planet, but maybe there's another reason for a crack unit to hit the train. That is on his own to figure out the crime and bring the perps to justice, even after a SagCon Special Investigator shows up. The Special Investigator has his own agenda, and it has nothing to do with the train robbery. Where do the 10 rules lead? Solving the crime may not bring peace and order back to Darklanding. Fans of Firefly, Bonanza, and Tombstone will love this space opera western and the characters that make a great story. This is the latest episode of Darklanding, number 3. It's available on Amazon. The link will be in the live chat and also in the show notes for the broadcast. It's a really good story. It's fun. They're short. They're only about 30,000 words a piece. And Scott does a really good job, I think, trolling out I love the Tombstone-esque feel of this world.
It's fun to write.
I've been enjoying my episodes of that, and I think I've really liked the idea of a heist. I love a good heist, contrary to my profession more often, as it should be. But nothing like a good heist too.
All cops love a good heist story. Come on.
Oh, come on, we don't want any boring robbery going on. We want proper Ocean's 11 type job.
Exactly.
Yes. And if anybody knows anybody from Netflix, give them a heads up, because this would be a great Netflix series.
It would.
Yeah, roger that.
So back to genre bending and creating these great worlds and readers' engagement. So Scott talked about getting feedback from your authors, and then we'll move on to the YA epic fantasy. So getting that feedback, how did that help you grow through the process of shorts to novels?
So really, I would just rely on reader reviews on my for the short stories. It wasn't until probably last year that I really built up a list, mostly through Insta Freebie, that I was confident enough that I had a sizable enough list that I could send out surveys for that kind of thing. I have really good beta readers for my long stories, and the way I did that was I sent out an email asking for people who are beta readers or who are interested in beta reading, but I didn't just leave it at that, because otherwise I'd get flooded and I wouldn't know who to pick through. So I asked them, who have you beta read for, and why do you like fantasy? 2 pretty basic questions that, if you're filling out that email, don't take more than 2 minutes to answer. But what it does for me is, if someone responds and says, yeah, I'd be interested, but don't answer my questions, then I know they're probably not going to take a close look at my books, so I can get rid of those. Yeah. And then for the ones who do answer, it lets me understand if we're on the same page. So we're going to touch a little bit on the genre thing. I write YA fantasy in part because I love Game of Thrones. I love the violent stuff, but I also like to write books that all ages can read. You know, I don't have kids. I don't think if I had kids, I'd read them Game of Thrones, George Martin stuff.
Hello, little Jimmy.
Let me explain this next scene to you, kid.
Do you like beheadings, Jimmy?
Yes. We're going to learn about red weddings today.
This is what happens to you when you do the right thing. You're gonna die.
Also, don't have sex with your sister.
There you go. Yeah.
For years and years and years and years.
Exactly.
Well, it's you're working for them, unfortunately, doesn't it?
But yeah, so when I'm reading the why they like fantasy, I can understand their mindset and see if we're compatible. So if they say, I really love the dark and gritty, Clash, and I can be like, okay, probably not going to be for me. But if they say, I love coming of age stories, I love magical worlds, I love dragons, then I know, okay, we might be a good fit. I've also since then, so from that I pulled in about three beta readers, because in my mind I'd rather have 3 or 4 who can give in-depth feedback than 10 who are just going to say, oh, I really liked it, great story. It's like,
right,
well, cool, but
that doesn't help me.
I know, right? So what I've done since, though, is I go through my reviews from the previous books and I look for who's leaving me really in-depth reviews. And there was one girl in particular named Steph who left that kind of review where it's so long that you have to click more to see what she's saying. And I was like, this is great. So I emailed her and asked her to be a beta reader, and she said yes. And so that's another way that I've gotten beta readers, is looking for who leaves reviews that go beyond just great book, love the characters, would recommend.
I remember way back in the when they used to have people's contact details on reviews. They seem to have removed that now, which I personally found quite useful as well.
Oh, like their email?
Yeah. But,
yeah. Well, so the one who left that one review was a subscriber of mine, so I was able to get that. Yeah, the ones who leave reviews who I don't know, obviously I don't have their email, but I did a similar thing with my advanced reader copies, where I basically said, who have you done advanced reader copies for? And if so, can you provide a link so I can see them? And, I'm not going to say no to them if they give me a link and it's a 5-word review, but it's another step to ensure, because I see a lot of posts on groups like 20 Books 50K where they say, I send out a review copy to 100 people and I got 2 reviews. And, well, that, if you have just even the slightest of filters to clear people out, it can, and I still had probably 45 copies sent out and only have about 20 reviews, but something in the 40%, 45% range is obviously a lot better conversion rate than in the single digits.
I just dealt with this
issue.
That'll
be the golden goose, that would, if you could have a 100% beta reader review. I mean, you look at someone like Isaac Hook, who's amazing, but he can have like 50 reviews in a day, clearly, because he sends out a lot of beta copies on day one. And
he's a huge reader list, and it's very engaged and loyal and all that. So
engagement is the important thing, isn't it? It's all you often see people banding around on newsletter swaps. I've got 20,000 subscribers. Have you got engaged 20,000 subscribers? Because that's something different.
Well, yeah, it depends on how you. Not all email lists are the same. I did a pen name project recently, or a few months ago, and I had 2 or 3 people that sent the book out to their 30,000K plus newsletter groups, but they didn't know me or my pen name, and just that was nothing. But then you got somebody who has like a smaller list of like 5,000 people, and they consistently land in the top 100 bestsellers on Amazon every time they launch a book, because they have 5,000 people who are really engaged in their writing, as opposed to 30,000 people who just have 30,000 free books on their Kindle.
Yeah, they're cultivated from the wrong ways like that.
Right.
I'm sure people have had varying results, but cultivated from Insta-freebie.
That's why I wanted to know how you get the feedback. Yeah. And how you get engaged.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it's interesting because Insta-freebie gave me about 3,000 subscribers, but I actually cut that down to about 1,800 recently, because I'm not the person who sends out a weekly email, but in 2017, I probably had about 26, 30 emails, so like one every 2 weeks. So I had a pretty good barometer of who was opening my emails and who was clicking. And of the, say, 1,500 I deleted, probably 1,000 had never opened an email. And then Yeah, and then the remaining 500. And you know, I've thought about it, and this is just a theory because I haven't tested it yet, but I think someone who subscribes to Insta Freebie, you as far as I'm aware, you don't buy anything off of Insta Freebie. But if you have a book for free on Amazon, that's a marketplace where you don't go to Amazon if you don't have money. I mean, you might, but you also probably have a paycheck coming. So
you probably like free, but you're not opposed to buying. Whereas Insta Freebie is strictly for free stuff.
Exactly.
It's a good tool, but I haven't figured out how to really use it that well. I know some people do.
Comes when you've got a higher amount of subscribers, and it really starts to cost you money. So it moves beyond that kind of. I'm viewing this as discretionary marketing expense to. I've got to consider this coming out now.
Yeah, I ended my Insta Freebie subscription, and don't get me wrong, it's done me a lot of good things. It gave me my beta readers and my ARC readers, but I think I've kind of, shall we say, moved past that, and I'm going to test free on Amazon to see how that does for sales, because I think Insta Freebie is a really good tool for getting people who will give you honest feedback, but I'm not so sure it's a great tool for converting those people into full-fledged buyers.
And I know it's different, but I believe your free books on Amazon still is in the Amazon algorithm magic someplace. I'm not sure what it counts for or where it does, but it is still in their system. Whereas when you give away a book on another platform, it's completely separate from Amazon, and Amazon doesn't know anything about people's interest in it.
Exactly.
So.
I kind of want to talk about your series, the War of the Magi books, because like we said before, right at the beginning of the show, the covers are phenomenal on these books. I'm looking at the book one now, Shadows of the Empire, with the dragon and the blue flame and death and destruction raining down on the town, and I really think that's neat. I also think that it's neat that you're doing the YA thing. So can you tell us a little bit about the universe there, what's going on with the book and the series, the War of the Magi?
Yeah, so it actually started, I wrote a fantasy novel that's going to come out in the next couple of months, and one of the first few chapters is the guy is in history class, and it's talking about how there was a great war 400 years ago, and I wrote that, and I thought I should write that series. So I've gotten to this series where Shadows of the Empire takes place. It's a world where the Magi are persecuted for being Magi. This is a cliche that you see played out in history where you fear and persecute that which is an easy scapegoat or that which you don't know and are afraid of. So in this world, there is the Magi, there is the Empire, and then there are the Dragon Hunters. And the Dragon Hunters, it's exactly what it sounds like. They're basically mercenaries. They hunt dragons for profit. And in this universe, there are 3 legendary dragons, which correspond to 3 different types of magic. And essentially, the head of the Dragons Guild, a woman by the name of Artemia, is seeking further. Basically, she's greedy. And so she basically persuades the Emperor to hunt one of the legendary dragons, which is just about a few hours hike south of the capital city. And so this, of course, creates chaos because it's one of those things where you bite off more than you chew. All of a sudden, this dragon, which was lying dormant, is now rather pissed off at the Empire and is starting to rain havoc. So it's kind of a mash of the Magi versus the Empire, the Dragon Hunters versus the Legendary Dragons, the Legendary Dragons versus the Empire, and then kind of I enjoy blurring boundaries. So you get to spots where the Empire and the Magi actually have to fight together to defeat this dragon. And as the series goes on, it gets more in depth with gods and demons, history, figures coming to life and that kind of thing. And I love series where it's a little bit of a mythical, a little bit of a deity feel, where it's bigger than just man versus man. I really enjoy writing that kind of thing.
That's fantastic.
I mean, just from the first instance, and just following on from Josh's comment. One of the things I really like about your colours is how tight the branding is. So the art is fantastic. I mean that just speaks for itself. But the branding, there's no doubt they're in the same series. They've got a colour theme that they follow on from each other. Really great. I don't know who your artist is, but kudos to them.
So, well, first that you see that there's a name for it, the swirl symbol beneath the word empire. I forget the name of it. It's a symbol that has an actual definition. Right. I got that idea from Ben Hale, where he has the same symbol on all the front covers of all his books and the spines of all his books. And so you'll notice that symbol is on every single cover.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so that way, it's my way of saying, hey, if you see this and you don't immediately see the name Stephen Allan, then you know it's one of my books. And I feel like that's something that will pay off.
The writer formerly known as Stephen Allan. He can be that symbol.
He can be the symbol.
There you go.
I also really like when you're describing kind of the different forces. It reminds me of Game of Thrones, because we talked about that. Where this is one where you could read it to your kids, but it has that, because like in Game of Thrones, you got the Lannisters and the Starks and Daenerys and all these different things that are all, their own realms of influence, but sometimes they overlap. So a very complex story, it sounds like.
Yes.
I also like the way that depending on where you lie on that, where your sympathies lie, then others can be the enemies as well. Each seems to have a valid reason for fighting, and sometimes you don't find that in fantasy. The evil empire is just evil because it's evil, and whereas actually, already,
absolutely,
in your summary there, I can already see the motivations for each going against each other,
right?
And each of them have valid motivations there.
Right. And so that's where my background, I was also a psychology major, comes into play, where what we call evil is often just self-preservation taking on an ugly form. And of course there are truly like evil people in history, and there's a term for that, sociopath, but in general, what we call evil is usually insecurity or self-preservation taking place. And so that's something I try and think of where, okay, why is the emperor so set on destroying the Magi? And it's not really spoiling anything to say that he recognizes that mano a mano, someone who has magic is much more powerful than someone who does not. And that's how that kind of plays out over the course of the series.
Yeah. It's like a mental internal congruence between, how they, your protagonist doesn't see themselves as the villain. They see themselves as protecting their family or, winning their particular conflict and stuff like that. I like everybody to be antagonists, basically, or protagonists.
Yes. The way I've always described it is your villains should once have been angels, and your heroes should have the capability of being demons.
Absolutely.
The idea being that, again, like your villains are someone who had maybe tragic circumstances that led him to this, or genuinely believe they're good, and your protagonists should have that dark side in them that drives them or comes out in moments, and it terrifies them a little bit to realize what they're capable of.
That's what makes them interesting, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you mentioned that that's 3 powerful dragons. Is it going to be a trilogy, and does each book deal with a different dragon? How does that affect your story?
Yeah. So the first book is a dragon by the name of Indika, which I believe it's a foreign word for blue, which is basically what the dragon's color is. There's Ragnar in the second book, which I just kind of got from Ragnarok, shortened a little bit.
Yeah.
And then speaking of Final Fantasy, the third one is Bahamut.
Nice.
Yes.
Bahamut from the AD&D also.
Yes, exactly.
I seem to recall that had the best summoning.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, the trilogy plays out from the, shall we say, structural perspective, but there are some powerful twists, I believe, that will show up along the way that kind of, it's not as predictable as just fight Indika, fight Ragnar, fight Bahamut, that kind of thing.
Right. No, I really, I'm intrigued by the Final Fantasy aspect of it, because I love Final Fantasy games. I think I only finished like 2 of them, but I love playing them. Just because, you know, they're so long, you go for hours playing them.
So go on. Here's a question: which is your favorite Final Fantasy game?
9.
Oh, man.
Got to put him on the spot. Next, we're going to ask whether or not he liked The Last Jedi.
Nail him into the ground.
I'm going to go with 3/6, depending on what country you're from.
Oh, good call.
Yeah,
good call.
I think we only started getting them in the UK after 7. So was that the one with Cloud Strife in it?
That's 7. No,
yeah, that's 7.
Yeah, 3/6 was Kafka.
And I was 8, I think, which was a controversial choice, I fully admit.
We have a vote for 9 on that.
Yeah, 9 was my favorite. I loved playing 9.
And I've never played any. I've always wanted to play them, but I've always been outside of the story.
I've never actually played 9, but yeah. So
I'm curious then, when you I want to try to get into the mechanics a little bit of your writing, since we've talked about kind of getting feedback and all that other rest of the stuff. So you're a full-time writer, right?
Yeah.
So how do you schedule your day out? What's a day like for you?
So, well, I used to think I woke up early at 7 a.m. and then I heard you guys talking. I realized 7 a.m. is sleeping in.
We're non-sleeping psychotics.
These guys are weird.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just say the only reason I get up that early is I don't have any other time in the day that I could block out to write, because
something that works.
Because I have 4 kids total. 2 of them live here, and the 2 that live here are 3 and below. And so
told you, man, you need a TV. All right?
I'm telling you. So yes, I get up. My alarm goes off at 4:11 in the morning. It's an odd time for it to go off, and then I hit this
time. Good choice.
I hit the snooze twice and then get out of bed. Usually I'm in front of the computer by 4:30, but yeah.
So 7 a.m.
So 7 a.m. I'm up. I get up, I drink a glass of water, I let my dogs out, kind of take like 15-20 minutes to kind of wake up. I know people say don't check your emails. I actually do. It's kind of a thing. I don't respond to emails, but by checking my emails, it's kind of like, okay, wake the brain up. What are they saying? What's in the inbox, that kind of thing. So I think that's kind of crucial. I don't respond. I don't spend brain power on it, but reading them gets me up. So then from about 7:30 to 11:30, I write in Pomodoro spurts of 25 minutes on, 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. In those 5 minutes, I like to go do something like brush my teeth or get a snack, something where I'm not checking my phone or at my computer. I like to get away from it as much as possible. Usually I'll do 4 of those and then take a 15-20 minute break where I'll take my dogs, walk them around my neighborhood. It's about a mile long walk. So that's a good way to reset the brain. So that will take me to about 11:30 or noon. I'll go to the gym at that point. The gym is my de facto meditation. I put my headphones in. I don't talk to anyone. It's my chance to kind of get to silence the brain and, just focus on exerting physical energy. Come back, eat, get back to the computer around 2. If I have the energy, I'll write. I usually don't, because it's like right around that afternoon swoon. So usually what I'll do is focus on marketing or advertising. If I need to plot out a book, the afternoon is a great time for me to plot out. Then early evening comes, I will go back and edit what I've written for the day. I'm one of those people who does a first and second draft simultaneously, where if in the morning I've written 8,000 words, I'll go back starting around 4:30 and
now back up to 8,000 words. I know people are going to want to know more about that. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. So I have a journalism background, and I'm very lucky in that regard, in that it taught me to write very quickly, very well, with specific times. And the reason for that is I primarily covered sports when I was in college. So you'd cover a basketball game that starts at 9 p.m. It ends at 11:30. You speak to the coach and the athletes. You wrap up by 11:50. well, you've got 15 minutes to write 900 words, go. And so,
and they can't suck.
And they can't suck, exactly. So that experience taught me to put the self-conscious voice aside, to put the self-editing voice aside, and just vomit the words out. I can type about, in one 25-minute sprint, the most I've ever written was about 1,800 words. Typically, it's closer to about 1,400, 1,500.
So that's still about 3,000 words an hour.
Exactly. And I find that if I've already outlined, the words just flow. But if I'm kind of pantsing it, then it becomes a little bit more difficult and my word rate suffers. But I also like to challenge myself by keeping records of the most words I've written in a day, in a week, in a month. Currently, the record is 22,000 words for me in a given day.
That's
my
insane.
hero.
Well, you know what's funny is
we're not worthy. We're not worthy. I think that's probably the record on the show, isn't it?
Well,
on the show,
Starkey,
Starkey did 50,000.
Sharky did a whole book in one day, but she's if you never met her, you should, because she's kind of awesome.
I'm interested in the in your if I've plotted or if I'm just pantsing comment. So, do you do a hybrid of both? And so if you don't plot out something, then how do you sit down to write?
I would say I plot out with the intention of not having to make stuff up as I go. Now, with that said, of course, like any other author, something will come to me mid-writing and I'll do that. But for me, the plotting is the most intellectually draining part of it. So if I've got a really solid plot, then to me, it's just translating bullet points into paragraphs. It's not that difficult of a task. It's just executing it. So I would say that in theory, I'm 100% plotter. In practice, it probably comes closer to 85% plotting, 15%. Oh, I should write that bit in there.
Right.
So bullet points, and so you're doing quite a lot of beats, I guess, would say. And so, like, for each plot point you write in your outline, you might write like a paragraph or two or something. Or I know some people they'll like outline, and then that would be like an outline point. Then they'd write like a whole chapter,
right,
off of that outline point.
Well, I actually treat my outlines like drafts, and that I will. So, like earlier today, I was outlining the draft of a second book in my series. So, like, for example, I write a week later. Claire, opening chapter, begins with her admiring the yellow crystal, wondering if she might be able to unlock its power, comma, stuff in all caps. And stuff being, I can't think of anything, but I've got other ideas, so I just want to get that down, so I know I have to go back and write more. And then right after that it says, and with guards finding out she's in there, attempting to burn it down, but she and the rest escape. So I kind of do write the plot, sit on it for a day or two, go back, edit it, add stuff as needed. So for me, plotting is almost an exercise in drafts as much as the actual writing process is.
Yeah. That sounds a lot like...
I'd love to have it as like one of these neat sort of things where you kind of start off with an elevator pitch, and like literally your document starts off in a sentence, and then your document might expand to a series of abbreviated bullet points, and then it'll expand to a series of full beats, and then you'll see that would almost be a similar thing to what you're saying. So like, you know, like making a rope bridge, you kind of swing a line across, and then you're adding, then you're planking, and all that kind of stuff. But that's sort of like kind of a mental image anyway of how I'm viewing it.
Exactly. And, you know, I try not to get too detailed. I don't have quotes or anything like that. But in general, all of the exposition and action for me, and at least on a general level, what the internal conflicts are going to be, need to be written out for me to best utilize my actual writing time.
How long does it take you to do an outline?
It's a good question. I would say probably about a week. So like today, I spent about an hour and a half working on the outline for book 2, and I got probably about 15 chapters in. It's going to take me, I usually aim for about 30 to 35 chapters in my books. And that's just the first draft of that. So I will probably either finish that outline later today or do it tomorrow, take Wednesday off, and then come back Thursday and Friday and fill it out, and then start working on it on Saturday.
I like that.
Just got one more question. I suppose it's been burning since your introduction. Really, is poker playing. A very cool way to earn a living. I suppose the thing I'm wondering is, and I struggle to see it, but then I've never before today had to consider it. Is there any transferable skills between your poker playing and the writing side of your profession?
Oh yeah, the one that immediately comes to mind is data keeping. I am a psychologist and a journalist by degree, so I am not a math person. I'm not a programmer or anything like that. But in poker, if you're not keeping track of statistics, you have no idea what's working for you. Yeah, you kind of know intuitively if you're winning or losing, but you're not going to know what hands are working for you, where your weak points are, that kind of thing. So for me, the data keeping in my words per day, my flow chart of work, how many chapters I'm editing a day. And this helps me, like, for example, usually I go through kind of a month. So like my word count goals go Monday, 8,000, Tuesday, 6,000, then 4,000, then back to 8,000, then 6,000, and then 2,000 for Saturday. And that's because I discovered that my workflow basically starts out really well, and then it kind of declines. But then if I have Wednesday be an easy day, I can go back up on Thursday. And yeah.
Is that because I've had the experience where I write a ton of words, but then you can maybe need to tweak them or edit them or throw some away. So is there something specifically that's happening besides just fatigue? I mean, what do you do to rally for your next big day of writing? Is there anything specific?
Honestly, not really. I think it's just a matter of taking it easy. I remember, so I said my record in a day was 22,000. I set out right after Smarter Artists Summit in 2016 to have a 100,000 word week. And somehow I pulled it off, but I also know that the next 2 weeks, I think I wrote a combined 10,000 words. So,
which is still respectable. Yeah.
You ever have one of those days? You ever those days you're writing and you're like, you're kind of you're reading a little bit, trying to get back into it, and then you look over at if you use Scrivener, like,
yes,
I do. It'll say, we need to talk about that, but it'll say your word count, and I'll look over there and I'll be like, 1, yeah, I got 1. I'm like, I'm not in the negative.
Yeah.
A lot of things that I do differently too than a lot of people is I count actual words typed and I don't delete words. I think some people get hung up on actual what words are going into the books, but it's like while I'm writing and I write in Scrivener, but while I'm writing, I don't delete anything. If I write a sentence and I don't need it, then I'll strike through it and leave it and keep writing. And I don't delete until after I'm done. So I know at the end of the day, like I'll write 2,000 words. I might keep 1,500, but I've still written 2,000 words, and that's still progress to me. So I count those words because you'll go back in editing and delete words or add words or whatever. Sure. So the number is always going to be different, but I never delete words while I'm word counting for the day. The only time I don't count words is when I'm editing.
That's an awesome way to do it. Because I use Word, obviously, I just get the absolute number. And remember, I was editing recently, and I think Ellen Campbell said one of her big things that she hates is over direction. And I had this scene. I can't remember the specifics of it. It's basically Ralph stood up. He went over there. He walked with one foot in front of the other to the door, and it wasn't that. It was a bit more interesting, but still, you could sum it up to Ralph went over there.
Ralph went to the door.
And like my editor had picked up on that, and I was like, "Yeah, okay, you've got a point." But it makes it so much incredibly stronger. That there's less fluff in there.
You should always have a scene that says, Ralph got up and walked to the door and subscribed to Keystroke Medium YouTube channel on the way. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm quite liking my my red shirts, Josh. You had an especially brutal end, didn't you?
Yes. Shot in the face. I mean, I didn't even see it coming. I got shot in the face.
That'll teach you.
So we are coming into the end of the hour, unfortunately. And it's been a fantastic show, as usually it is. Stephen, can you share a little bit about where we can find your books and learn more about you?
Well, so my website is stephenallan.com. I need to add the caveat that I think it got hacked because I went on there this morning and I realized the way it usually is that you go there and the homepage is 3 of my book covers, and then I just checked and none of those book covers are there. So I'm gonna have to call WordPress for a little bit. But then on Amazon, just Stephen Allan, Stephen, last name Allan. It's a little bit different.
Yeah, of course, that's great.
Yeah, Stephen like Stephen King, Allan, Allan. Find my books there. Facebook, Stephen Allan author. That's the Facebook page. I have Instagram, but I don't really put a lot of author stuff on there. It's more just kind of my own personal life kind of stuff. But if you want to stalk me on there, Stephen A. Allan is where to find it.
All right. Well, I posted the link to Stephen's author page on Amazon. Go check out his books for sure. I definitely am going to. I think I actually already picked up one of the Kastori Chronicles.
I got Shadows of the Empire book 1 on KU right now. So
nice.
Nice.
Thank you, guys.
Dig into that one. Looking good.
Yeah.
Then we can go to the post show and talk about Scrivener and all that crazy stuff. Make some more really bad jokes.
Post show. Where's the calendar at? So let's see. So next week, for the next 2 weeks, I will not be here. So you will be stuck with Scott and Chuck and maybe Ralph. We'll see. On the 19th, Casey Azell.
Environment imaginable.
Yeah. That's all you had to say. Scariest environment imaginable. So Casey Azell will be here on the 19th with one of her co-author friends. On the 26th, we had to reschedule Nick Cole and Jason Onspach from the 12th to the 26th for reasons that will be apparent on the 26th. And on the 12th, it's either going to be Chuck and Scott blathering on, or we might have a secret surprise guest. We'll see. So definitely stay tuned for that. I'll post updates in the group as well. If you're new to the show, check us out on Facebook, Keystroke Medium. We're the only one on Facebook. We're the only one on the web, keystroke.medium.com. Come back next week. We're going to hang out, talk about some reading. We're going to talk about some writing, and, of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. Later.